Wendy Smith. I am the OMT program chair this year, and no matter how exhausted you might already be, this officially opens the program for AOM. So get ready. This is absolutely my favorite part of the Academy program, where we honor scholarship and elevate some of the core ideas in our field, honoring our core scholars. I'm really thrilled that this year's program is being sponsored by the University of Delaware Lerner School of Business, George Washington University School of Business. So thank you to our universities for ensuring that you have enough eggs and bacon to make sure that you are happy this morning. And I am so sorry to stop the networking that has been happening in this room so that we can learn about networking, but it is truly an honor to have you all here. And with that, I will turn this program over to our absolutely fabulous OMT PDW chair, who has been responsible for the last couple of days, and turn over this program, Joel Gaiman.
Thanks so much, Wendy. Well, hello, OMT. It's awesome to be together with you here in Chicago. Soon I'm going to be introducing you to our distinguished scholar, David Krackhardt. But first, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the award we're giving out. Since 1980, the Organization and Management Theory Division has been presenting the Distinguished Scholar Award to scholars whose contributions have been central to the intellectual development of the field of organization studies. You can see a couple of quotes from our website in terms of the formal criteria we look for in our award winners. To quote, as individuals, each recipient embodies a career of scholarly achievement and has had a significant impact on OMT scholarship. Taken together, our list of honorees reflects the diverse theoretical and personal backgrounds of our division. On the next slide I show you, you're going to see the list of the 44 winners to date. And I'd like to invite any of our past winners who are here in the room with us to please stand up and be recognized. So I know some of you are out there. Please join me in. Now, later today, we're going to have a Q&A session. So their breakfast is actually not free. Their job is to ask the tough questions first. So I'll be looking to all of you. But now it's with great enthusiasm that I'm here to introduce David Krackhardt as this year's winner of the OMT Distinguished Scholar Award. David Krackhardt is Professor of Organizations at Carnegie Mellon University. He has a dual appointment at the Heinz College of Information Systems and Public Policy and the Tepper School of Business. CMU has been his university home since 1991. Before CMU, David held faculty positions at Cornell's Johnson Graduate School of Management and at Harvard. Over the years, he's been a visiting professor at University of Chicago, Bocconi, INSEAD, Stanford. His degrees include a BS degree from MIT and master's and PhD degrees from the University of California, Irvine. Since beginning his career in the 1980s, he's authored nearly 100 publications. He's appeared in many of our field's top journals, such as ASQ, AMJ, AMR, including a paper as a doctoral student, if I did the math correctly, Organization Science, Research Policy, SMJ, as well as journals across the social sciences more broadly, including Journal of Applied Psychology, Social Psychology Quarterly, Social Networks, and many more. David's contributions, and I'll have to give a brief overview of just some of them, include his pioneering idea of cognitive social structures, which is a mental map of the individual builds of the informal relationships in an organization. According to some of his friends and colleagues who nominated him for this award, this idea has reshaped our understanding of how individuals and groups perceive and navigate organizational relationships. He brought this concept to the field more broadly in his influential 1990 ASQ paper, Assessing the Political Landscape, Structure, Cognition, and Power in Organizations, in which he argued that accurate cognition of the informal network of an organization is itself a basis of organizational power. David also reintroduced the work of a German sociologist, Georg Simmel, to the field through his explorations of the Simmelian ties, By introducing these concepts, David has opened up new avenues for exploring interplay between social networks and cognitive processes. Another early and long-standing contribution was the development of KrackPlot, a software package that enables network visualization. This software tool became widely used in academic research and served to make network visualization accessible to a broad range of scholars. And he pushed the frontiers of rigorous research methods with his work on the quadratic assignment procedure, or QAP, a method of accounting for dependencies across observations and regression, useful for network research as well as other contexts. Finally, to give you a sense of David's cumulative impact, as I was preparing these remarks last week, David was nearing 34,000 citations on Google Scholar. In addition to his research contributions, like so many of our OMT Distinguished Scholars, David's demonstrated a deep commitment to mentoring and collaboration. I think he's sitting at a table with a bunch of former students, if I understand correctly. He served on the dissertation committees of some 24 students by my count, co-authoring with many of them over the years. I'm going to now turn to a few anecdotes I was able to collect from just some of his many students and collaborators. I received more recollections than I'll have time to share. Martin Kilduff was David's student at Cornell. He wrote to me, as a new doctoral student, I had my first meeting with David Krackhardt in the Johnson School of Management in August 1984. I asked David's advice on what courses I should take. There are no courses, he told me. You are here to do research. Actually, there was one course that David did teach for doctoral students together with Steve Barley. I don't think there was any teaching credit for that course, but it changed my whole outlook. I had no knowledge of social networks, but in that course that attracted not just graduate students, but also faculty, we read and discussed the foundational documents for the rise of modern social network analysis. The course was revelatory and inspiring. Every week I was drawn deeper into the theories, methods, and promise of social networks for organizations. And yes, I started to do research as soon as I arrived at Cornell, and the focus on research has stayed with me ever since. David Decker wrote to me, although technically not his student, he certainly has influenced me a lot, and I consider him a teacher. We first met when I was a PhD student 25 years ago. David then told me a really long and beautiful story about how he came to take David to lunch at an Indonesian restaurant in Rotterdam, where David discovered a favorite dish, which if I pronounce it correctly is something like reshaped, which remains a favorite to this day. This meal led to a collaboration and a friendship that has lasted 25 years. David Decker closed by saying, during most of this time, he freed up a weekly hour to discuss, often quite intense and heated research, papers, politics, and life in general. So yes, an amicable teacher, but most of all, a very loyal and supportive friend. Sharik Hassan wrote me, David is sometimes one of the hardest people to get a meeting with. He's not the only one to tell me this, by the way. But when you get one, it's sometimes impossible to end it. If you were lucky enough to have him as an advisor, you know David can talk about statistics, psychology, sociology, politics with exclamation points, and everything in between. And he's always one of the most enjoyable people to talk research with. He's always excited about your idea, encouraging, and sees the positive in everything you do, even if he completely disagrees with you. According to Shihan Lee, one of David's most recent students, he's been an incredible mentor and professor, always willing to go the extra mile to support his students, and his dedication and passion for teaching and research have been truly inspiring. Tiziana Casacaro shared 3 classic encounters with me. I only have one that I have time with today, but she reported, it's hard to get the guy to reply to emails. So what's a needy student to do? To get a hold of him, you just plop yourself outside his office and you wait. And you wait some more until he shows up. And sure enough, he welcomes you warmly into his office and spends hours talking about research, giving you invaluable input topically, theoretically, and methodologically, all joyfully delivered, the best. Finally, one of my informants, who I'll keep anonymous, even revealed a fun fact about David. David is a fantastic singer who has toured nationwide singing in a barbershop quartet. You should ask him to sing, my informant tells me. David, I won't put you on the spot to sing, but I do wish to congratulate you on being the recipient of the 2024 Distinguished Scholar Award. The OMT division is lucky to have such an extraordinary scholar impacting our own work and intellectual community. Please join me.
This was the original title of my talk. My daughter, sitting right over there, got wind of it. She said, "You better modify that." So that's the new title. And in a sense, it's kind of a silly title because I think in large part I'm preaching to the choir. However, I will say I'm not only honored to get this award, but I'm really surprised. I'm really surprised, and I want to share a little bit with you why I'm surprised. My training was at Irvine, as Joel mentioned, but it was in the business school, but it was not in social networks. I was a Lyman Porter student. Lyman Porter is a psychologist. I was an organizational psychologist. I was trained to study job satisfaction, organizational commitment, and turnover. And that's about it. But we were really good at measuring those things, and I got a lot of good training on how to measure that kind of thing. Port was a fabulous advisor. I developed a dissertation proposal in line with to study the socialization of auditors as they entered auditing the field of audit, as they became auditors, professional auditors, much in the kind of the mold of John Van Manen, who was one of my earlier influencers. And what I did was I developed a proposal where I would actually join the auditing firm, hand out job attitude questions to these incoming people for several months and watch as they grow and become more and more committed to being an auditor. That was my dissertation. I was excited. My dissertation committee was excited. Port was excited. Everybody was excited. And Port said, "I'll help you get into one of these auditing firms," because he says, "I know them all." One by one, each of the big 8 auditing firms turned me down. The last one to turn me down was Arthur Anderson, which back then was a real auditing. And when it turned me down, they were most excited about me coming. They wanted to learn what I was going to be studying. And I went in, when the other 7 turned me down, I called up Arthur Anderson. I said, my contact there, and I said, you're lucky. I am choosing you as the place I'm going to study. And the guy says, "David, I've been regretting this phone call." He says, "Unfortunately, we would love to have you here. Our lawyers won't let you." And they said, "Because you're not insured, and we just can't let you know." I said, "Why am I not insured? I have insurance." He said, "No. Big umbrella insurance. You know, if something happens while you were mucking around in our organization, we could be liable. So we can't do it." I was really depressed. Well, my whole life, my whole career had just gone out the window. I had nothing to do. All my years of study and planning were now up in smoke. I didn't know how I was going to tell Port. So I walked back in to the Social Science Tower. Now, back in those days, the business school occupied the 3rd floor of Social Science Tower. That's where my office was, that's where Port was, that's where everybody was. I walked into the bottom floor. I'm really forlorn, I'm depressed, I don't know what I'm going to do. And somehow I got in the elevator and I didn't push the 3rd floor button like I usually do. I pushed the 7th floor button. I don't remember pushing the 7th floor button. All I know is when the elevator doors opened, I walked out onto a floor that I'd never been on before. And there was nobody in the hall except this one gentleman with white hair, and I recognized him from pictures. He was the Dean of Social Sciences, which occupied the last top 4 floors. And so I got off the 7th floor, opened up, and there's Lynn Freeman. Now, I didn't know who Lynn Freeman was. I had no idea about networks. But he looked at me, and I was looking kind of, upset. And he says, "Can I help you?" And I was too embarrassed to say, "Oh, I pushed the wrong button on the elevator. I gotta go down." I was too embarrassed to say that. So I told him instead, I said, I came to see you. People told me I would be really interested in your work. I had no idea who he was, what work he did. So he said, oh, then come in my office. And for the next hour and a half, he told me about network analysis. Lynn Freeman, if you don't know, is like one of the founding fathers of the field. He's the founding editor of Social Networks, leading scholar, invented betweenness centrality, was a pioneer in the field. I didn't know any of that. But he told me all about that in his, and then he says, look, why don't you come to my PhD seminar? You don't have anything else to do. I'm doing a PhD seminar with faculty and PhD students on networks, and you can come and just sit in there and learn, you know, pick stuff up. I said, all right, what else am I going to do? My life is over, I might as well. So I show up and he hands me this typewritten manuscript. He says, look, you're an organizations person. Your job in the seminar is, this is a manuscript of a young scholar who's on his way to maybe doing something important. And your job is to read this manuscript and tell us what it says. It was Ron Bird's first book toward a structural theory of action. His typewritten manuscript he had sent to Lynn. I read that thing, and when you're going to present to a bunch of faculty, you read things carefully. I read it. His chapter 2 was a wonderful history of the field, and chapter 5 was about this idea, weird idea, about people being wrong in their perceptions of networks. Now, he had no idea what perceptions of networks was about, but I didn't know anything about networks, but I did know something about perceptions, and that was the fun. And I read that. It was my road to Damascus experience. It completely changed my life. I said, there is nothing in the field of organizational behavior, organizational psychology, that we cannot do from this network perspective. And there are a whole bunch of questions we haven't even thought of asking yet that we can ask from this perspective. I threw out my old dissertation, developed a new one, studied turnover using networks in fast food restaurants, and I've been doing networks ever since. All because I pushed the wrong button. I tell that story to my grad students because I tell them, don't be afraid to push the wrong button. It really, you never know what's going to happen. All right. So Ron, he didn't know that at the time. I didn't know him really, but he had a profound influence on my life. He continued to, we've had a lot of connections since then, and he's been a major influence, I think, on all of us who studied in this area. So, what happened was I went from Irvine to Cornell, and fortunately for me, when I got to Cornell, there was Ron Dreigert. Ron Dreigert is another leading scholar in the field. He was in sociology, took me under his wing, and I learned all kinds of things about networks directly from him. It was wonderful. He was my tutor. He was my tutor. Wonderful colleague. Can't say enough about him. And in addition to that, my first graduate student, you should all have as your first graduate student, Martin Kilden. It was one of the great blessings of my career. In addition to that, Sharon McCarthy was my first TA. And now she's sitting in the front row, right near Martin. She's also my wife. And more on that. Anyway, then from there, I really went to Harvard, and that was fun. It was only a year, but I got to meet Hermania Ibarra, became a close friend. She was a junior faculty member. Joel Podolny, this is how old I am. Joel Podolny was a grad student, and so was Ranjay Gulati. And so this was a very rich time to be there. And Noria also was there, and I had a great time. It would have lasted longer, but then eventually went to Carnegie Mellon, where I've been ever since. And I went to work, there were a couple faculty already there that were very prominent. I became close colleagues colleagues with Patrick, Kathleen Carley, and then a couple other students, and I got more students over time. All of these people have gone on. I mean, I think the key to success in this business is to gather around PhD students that are smarter than you are, and they will help carry you through with all kinds of new ideas. And I really believe that's a good model for all of us. All right. Why are networks interesting? I think they are interesting in part because it's the only place where units and levels of analysis are really different from one another. This is an important, I think, important insight. And I'm going to frame it this way. First of all, units of analysis are different from, I mean, ordinarily we think of units and levels of analysis, you know, the individual unit, the individual level, same thing. Organizational unit, organizational level. Units of analysis for us are different. Units of analysis are the definition of the node. What is the node? And it can be an individual. It can be, in fact, an organization itself, because you can have relations like Ron J's stuff, organizations. It could be nations. A lot of political scientists study the relationships between nations, and you can draw maps like this. It could be industries. Ron Bird himself has written some very interesting work on how industries are related to each other in certain ways. So the unit of analysis tells us what level of aggregation each node is in the network. But levels of analysis are different. Levels are really different. I'm going to get really nerdy for just a second. I promise I'll get off that kick very quickly. A level of analysis, given a domain of n social units and given a set of relations among the n social units, that's a network. The level of analysis being conducted in the study is equal to the exponent L in the term n to the L that approximates the number of observations created in the system of n units to answer the research question of interest. All right, you can forget all that, because I'm going to give you some examples that I think are probably important. Normally, in our thinking of doing research, the way we've been trained, we think in vectors. We create a matrix, but they're really cases with variables. And those vectors are what we think of as the important observations that we have on each of those cases. For example, let me just give you an example here. Here's a set of people that have a trust score. There's one manager, everybody else on the same level. And this, I rank ordered them in terms of their trust. How trusted are they? How trustworthy are they? And certainly, this is an important variable to study. But let me show you with the help of a little bit of some, get my glasses so I can see what I'm doing. Give you an example of what can happen when we expand that to a network perspective. Okay, this is the same data. Notice over here, Linda has 8 ties, or 8 people that trust her. Roger has 7. Some people have 6, some people have 5. But the truth is, well, now I'm asking a question that you can see. Not only how much trust is embedded in that person, but also who's doing the trusting. The problem is I gave it to you in a circle. If I have KrackPlot I'm not going to change any of the data, I'm just going to move the nodes, it's going to move the nodes around. That's the same picture. Now, all of a sudden, you see something very different than the fact that Linda has the most ties. What you see, first of all, there are 2 subgroups here. You see Conrad's special role here that was hidden in that when we were just looking at the vector of things. And this is the starting place that gives us an insight into how networks are really different. This is a network. It's a matrix. It's not a vector. The network itself, the variables that we create that are interesting are matrices themselves. And at level 1, we can ask a question clearly, whether or not, you know, how central people lot. For example, Linda has pretty high centrality. Conrad has really high between us, a different kind of centrality, and so on. And we can ask all kinds of questions at that level 1, and we can do lots of, but that's just one level. That's the first level, where we have n observations. We use the network to derive observation on each person. Level 2 starts asking the question, well, why is Linda tied to Roger? Why is Will tied to Roger? Why is Roger not tied to Pete? There are n-squared dyadic questions we can ask that totally get ignored when we look at just the vector attributes of individuals. That is really a fundamentally different way of thinking about the problem. And then we can go to level 3, one of my favorite. Level 3 requires 3 subscripts by each one of these levels. Also tells you how many subscripts you need to actually talk about the observation you're looking at. Level 3 asks the question, well, we might have a network here, but we also have people observing these networks, and they might have different perceptions of what's going on. So you have an observer, K, talking about the relationship from I to J. So, for example, Roger, who's the manager here, he's the leader, this is his view. He thinks he's at the center of the network. It's like the solar system. Everybody's kind of tied to him. And it turns out that's not the same network that is the true network, underlying network, but that's his view. And that colors how he runs this organization. On the other hand, Pete's view looks like this. He sees it a very disconnected network, very not at all integrated together, and he's something of a rebel in this group. And he doesn't even see Linda, who has most ties, and Roger ain't even tied together. They're in separate groups. We can learn all kinds of things about the organizational structure by looking at people's maps of what they think the network is. There's real valuable information that we cannot even think about when we're thinking about attributes, just vectors. It expands our world of questions that we can go after. There's one more, and this is the one that's really important for OMT, and that is the stuff that comes from the history of our field. Lawrence and Lorge, Thompson, level 0. Level 0 says n to the 0 is one. We only have one observation, and it's the network as a whole. It's a structure as a whole. It's the shape of the network as a whole. And what effect does that shape have on how the network can perform? How do we characterize, how do we measure that shape? This is not an easy question. It's rich in possibilities. And 2, what are the consequences of these various shapes? Now, we have some history that leads us there about hierarchy and centralization from the old days. But, back in those days, they'd hand out the question and say, how centralized do you think your organization is? Whereas now, the ability to actually look at the structure and come up with these measures gives us a much richer understanding. And I'm going to say this is where OMT can really play the game, can really take advantage of the network paradigm or program or perspective, the network way of looking at the world. Structural holes, with a W. I just want to quickly say that there's a history of all 4 levels. First of all, most of the work in network analysis, you look it up, is going to be in level 1. Ron Bird has single-handedly put a stamp on this field. He's had more influence than anybody else. It's hard to see a network paper these days without reference to Ron Bird's structural holes and constraint. Very valuable, important work that's been done over the years, led by Ron. But there's also, you can look at the question, what about, how do you form those things? Well, there's some answers to those questions like homophily or philos ties or Simmelian ties. These are different ways of looking at the question, what are the dyadic relationships? How stable are they? Why do they form? How do they disintegrate? And so on. These are important questions that are still on the table. I want to say another 5 to 10% of the work is done in this level 2 area. Then you have to get into more sophisticated kind of statistics. There's the crap stuff that I happen to love, but most of the field like circles. Level 3 has really gained popularity. You know, Rainer Brandt, I think, has really helped. Martin has really helped to bring this to the fore, because we want to understand how these structures affect our cognitions, how our cognitions affect the structures. Analyzing those at the triadic level, at the really RIJK level, is difficult. Carter Butts has been doing some work recently that gives me hope that we're going to be able to answer some more questions statistically in that area. However, level 0, I think this is where the payoff is. We have lots of ideas: core periphery, graph theoretic dimensions, small world index, EI index, Pecans model. By the way, the Pecans model, I think, is a wonderful way to reinterpret all of Thompson's ideas about projection and about interdependencies. All of those propositions, it can be framed with this network structure of the Pecans model in a way that I think will shed a whole new light on that field, put life back into it. The analytic tools, though, it's either you're doing a case study because you only get one observation for the whole network, or you have to collect lots of network data. It's expensive. Level 0 is expensive, but it has real payoffs. I want to just quickly give you 2 examples of a level 0 network, because I really believe that's where OMT can not only add a lot to our understanding, because OMT has great theory, and network analysis has great ideas and perspectives, and also some wonderful methodology to help marry some of that, or look at some of that theory, and perhaps in different ways. I want to share some of that with you. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the EI index. That's that's a very straightforward, simple kind of, it's the easiest, simple understanding, a measure of the macro, of the shape of the network. Organizations are divided, as we know, into departments or groups or divisions or whatever, and then we have people in them. And ordinarily, what we find is that networks tend to form within those groups. I call that the natural silo, where all the networks form within these boundaries. But one could imagine, if one were creative, a spaghetti organization that looks like this, where all the ties cut across these boundaries. Now, no organization exists completely at one extreme or the other, but what you can do is measure the extent to which the organization is shaped by how these ties cut across these boundaries. E is the number of external ties, bridging ties that cut across those boundaries. I is the number of internal ties within those boundaries. The EI index easily ranges from -1 if it's all internal ties, and is a silo organization, to +1 if it's all external ties, and it's a spaghetti-like structure. Now, when I first came up with this idea, I was working with Bob Stern, who was also working with Sharon, and we came up with a study, a way to do it. And the way we did it was we looked at performance as a function of the EI index. The way we did that was we actually ran an experiment where I had a class of 60 people divided in half, ran 2 simulated weekend-long simulations of an organizational function where they had to accomplish tasks. They had to invest in buying puzzles, solve them, and coordinate and do all kinds of organizational things. It was part of a class. I did 2 simultaneous organizations run on different floors. One had a very strong, high EI index with cross-cutting friendship. I knew where the friends were because I already asked them that. and cut the friends across the division, and then put the other half down where I put all the friends within divisions. So I had one with very positive EI index, one with very negative EI index, and this is what we found over 4 different runs of this experiment, and that is that the silo organization never did as well as the spaghetti organization. Spaghetti organization worked always better. Now, that's already published. Let me tell you something though. This is not published. In one of the organizations, well, in the natural organization, in the first time I ran this, one of the students in my class came into my office and stole the solutions to the game out of my office 2 days before we ran the simulation. And he also stole the play money, you know, the Monopoly money, out of my files in my office. He came into this simulation with unlimited resources. He had solutions to all the puzzles they had to solve, and he had an unlimited amount of money. He Xeroxed all the money in the right colors. And he was running around, and they thought he was a genius. Because he could solve. Now, he happened to be in one of the production departments where that knowledge really paid off. And yet, his organization still didn't do as well as the other organization, despite that. And why was that? Because what happened was, in this organization, what I did was I kind of introduced a resource buying here, put them in a recession, they got less pay, it cost more to do things, and it made life difficult. They had a challenge of how they were going to reorganize to do it. And what happened was the people in the spaghetti organization, they got together, there was a coordinating crew down here, and they went around and said, how are we going to respond to what Krackhardt just did to us? This crisis they put us in. How are we going to respond? And they worked together and came up with a collaborative solution that balanced all the costs across the whole division. In this organization, this group also put together a team, went around, and when they came around to the production group here that was really doing pretty well, they came around and said, we got to figure out how to deal with this Krackhardt-induced recession. And their response was, well, no, we, in our department, are keeping this organization afloat. We are doing really well. You guys have the problems. If it weren't for us, this company would have been bankrupt by now. You go solve the problems all you want, you leave us alone. What was key about that was their definition of we. The networks influenced what the definition of we was. And in the siloed organization, we was the people around the department. You threaten the organization, we start identifying even more with our local group where our friends are, and we stop having cooperative ties outside. I never would have known that had we not really dug deep into this particular event where the kid had stolen the solutions out of my office, which we didn't find out about until later. And all of a sudden, and they still didn't do as well. I have one more empirical example I'd like to share with you about how macro structures can make it, how really level zero can pay off. One is, and this is what I like to call the fallacy of unjustifiably large scales of analysis. The fallacy of unjustifiably large scales of analysis stems from the fact we just seem to be so enamored with big data these days. So as far as I'm concerned, the fallacy of unjustifiably large scales of analysis, I cry foul. I cry foul. You see, we are inundated now in the field of networks, especially those of us in that community. We find ourselves facing an onslaught of work by physicists who love to look at networks like this. They're beautiful. Barabasi is an artist. I mean that literally. This is not a metaphor. He's actually an artist. And he spends time figuring out how to make really beautiful, colorful pictures that also happen to be, distributed by a power law. That's his favorite thing. And I want to just share with you why I think that might be a mistake. I did a study of 52 bank branches in the classic Thompsonian way. They had pooled interdependence, very, very kind of separate bank branches. They ranged in size, they had range in profitability. The bank monitored their profitability every year that they contribute to the branch itself. And I was asking the question, can we do a level 0 analysis at the branch level that helps to predict how profitable these branches were? And I was, I had a beautiful theory. I want to say this was a great development study. It was an opportunity of a lifetime to do this because, how many times you get a chance to do this? And I had a beautiful theory that I was testing with this about the shape of these networks. And I would say right off the bat that it was a beautiful theory. I had beautiful data. They just didn't get along with each other. The best I was able to ever squeeze from my theory out of the data was an R-squared of about 0.10. I could actually reach statistical significance on some of the ideas, but I never felt very comfortable. 0.10 R-squared was not comforting to me. So in fact, I presented it at the Academy, but I never really published it. I gave the data to a joint student, Steve Feinberg, and mine, and I gave the data 1,100 employees over this population and divided up among these 50 branches. I gave the data to him, and boy, I'll tell you, your best friend sometimes can be a good statistician. This was such a valuable symbiotic relationship. I'm also going to say this all of a sudden became an abductive study. This became an abductive study, no longer a deductive or hypothesis testing study at all. What I was doing was exploring. And what he did is he looked at the in-degree of advice in these network ties. Barabasi would love this curve. This is a nice power law distribution. You can see in degrees, it's a power law. That power law fits great here across all 52 branches cumulatively. What Steve's my student did is he noticed that in fact, if you look at the individual branches, they didn't look so neat. And as a matter of fact, if you looked at the in-degree distribution of many of the branches, a lot of them looked like this. They became there was very much a bimodal distribution with many of the ties in this range of in-degree, then a big valley, and then a bunch of people, or a smaller number of people, who had high in-degree. The key was it was bimodal. It was not power at all. And once you did that, now different ones had the bimodal were different, so you aggregate, you miss that. You lose that completely. He said, well, let's think about that. It turns out, first of all, the number of branches that were bimodal was 49 out of 52. Now, that, first of all, is interesting. Second of all, and so the other 3 branches were multimodal, and you couldn't really tell. But what he did was, he says, let's consider those at the high end, let's consider these people the leaders, the people with lots of in-degrees. They're the leaders, and they're the followers, the people with low in-degree. And he said, let's try to work with that information. And what he did was he came up with a measure of the extent to which the leaders were really, were reaching across levels in their network ties, or were they really only reaching people similar to them? So that's kind of a reach number. And then also, looked at the followers. Were they reaching across, or were they only kind of reaching people similar to themselves? And it turns out that by calculating the ratio of those two numbers, you get this thing that we call psi, that's short for science, or at least an abductive kind of science. And it turns out that that ratio turns out to be incredibly correlated with profitability. That little, not so simple ratio, description of the bank branch on dimensions that were totally hidden when you aggregate, you'll kind of miss that completely, reveals an important underlying function that enables us to understand how these branches operate. Now, it turns out the other three branches, where you couldn't really tell who the leaders were and everything, they created problems, so we threw them out. We didn't throw, I mean, we admitted they were there. We just, what we cared about was this relationship. Huge. All right. So, in summary, I'd say, a network perspective helps free us from vector thinking, which gets in our way of really finding out what's interesting and important in the social phenomena, especially organizational phenomena. It even helps us think about questions that we can't even ask in vector thinking. Second, going bigger and bigger is not necessarily better, because there's insight in looking at subpopulations and understanding what's going on. That's the psychology part of my training coming to, it's part of my bias here. But I think it's true. I think it's true. We get insight by looking at some of the details inside rather than just staying at this macro level. And also, there's a bright future for both organizational theory and social network analysis working together, especially at zero level, but cutting across all levels and units of analysis. And some networks are more important than others. Here's mine. And there's my new
time for some questions. Who wants to start us off?
Did you say start soft or start?
Well, maybe. We'll see.
What happened to the student?
What happened to the student? Oh, the one that took the stuff out of my... Yeah, that's a very good question. I will say the day that student announced he did that in the following class, which he did. He announced to the whole class that he did that. I didn't know he'd done that. Sharon didn't know he'd done that. The day he did that was the worst day of my teaching life. I was young. It was a good lesson we learned here, and I guess it was good I learned it young. What I did was, my first reaction when he announced it because he thought I knew, and he thought I was trying to elicit him to confess. That wasn't true. Well, what he did was he announced that he did that, and I said, "Oh yeah, we do that." Bad scene. Because all of a sudden, all the students start saying, "You knew this? This guy just ruined. We spent a whole weekend doing this exercise. He ruined it. You knew this the whole time." They turned on me. It got really, really bad. And Sharon and a bunch of other students who were kind of on my side. Sharon fortunately stayed on my side. And came up and said, "Dave, you didn't know Sharon knew I didn't know. You can't let them think you knew. And I talked to faculty for the next couple of days. I didn't know what to do. It was awful. One of the faculty recommended that I have the kid arrested, stealing stuff out of my class. Another faculty member said, don't worry about it. That happens all the time. What happened was I turned it over to the Academic Integrity Committee. They made a decision on what to do with him, and they said I'd be fine with that. He wanted to stay in the class. The students did not want him to stay in the class. What was I going to do? I could have kicked him out easily. And fortunately, I didn't have to, because the Academic Integrity Committee said he cannot stay in the class. And they gave him an F in the class, and a bunch of stuff. That's what happened. Big lesson for me. You know, you learn a lot from these mistakes you make. Pushing the wrong elevator button. And so on.
First, I just want to say thank you for your amazing talk. Thank you for your contributions to the field, to sharing the stories about how small things make a big difference, like pushing an elevator button. You may not remember this article about the diffusion of controversial innovations, organizational viscosity. It's a tiny chapter in an obscure book, but I remember reading it my second year as a PhD student, and it changed the way I thought about my work.
Really?
So I really want to say thank you. And
So I'm your wrong word. That's really that's the thing anybody could ever say.
It's very true. And thinking about the way, I'm now going to ask you a question about thinking about how to keep a network perspective kind of open to helping people think in new ways. I find myself faced quite often with my colleagues at econometric training, who I love. I study sometimes organizational learning, and I like to take a network perspective. And they say to me, Effie, I can learn all of that by studying spillover effects. And I keep trying to say to them, yes, these are similar kinds of ideas, but look at how you can understand the role that these ties between people play in learning and see with your approach. And I'm never able to convince them in the ways that I think they should be convinced. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Was that a question?
Do you have any thoughts on that?
You know, I get that a lot. I will say, I'll go back to my training. Lyman Porter was not a networker. Lyman Porter did not believe in networks. Lyman Porter thought that he kept telling me, network analysis is just a methodology. There's no theory there. There's no real social science. I said, Porter, you're wrong. He says, no, I'm not. And we'd have this discussion. Now, where I'm going to give him credit is he was fully supportive of my dissertation, the change, and did it. He helped me get a job. And I mean, despite the fact he totally disagreed with me on those same kinds of dimensions, there's nothing really substantive there. I think I changed his mind by the time we co-authored a couple pieces later from my dissertation. But he was very reticent. I think what it is vector thinking dominates our training so much, we think that's where the answer is. That it's hard for us to break free from that. And it takes a real kind of jolt to do that. My best antidote is stories like this. Like the one where the bow tie that comes out of the circle. I mean, that is a story that's quite compelling. And that gets people's attention. I like telling stories like that to people, drawing, borrowing from different things. Not tables of analysis, not numbers, stories. Pictures and stories. Say, how are you going to do that without a network? How are you going to even ask the question? That's my answer.
Thank you. Time for maybe one last question, if it's clear. I'm not seeing any, so let's join me in thanking David for his talk and congratulating him once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, David Krackhardt. That was brilliant. David, thank you this morning for inspiring us in terms of both your scholarship and in terms of being a scholar. It is truly my greatest thrill to be in the Distinguished Scholar program each year, to learn both about the ideas and the people behind the ideas. So thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. This, as I said, officially opens the OMT program, and we hope that you'll join us tonight at the OMT business meeting, also here in the Fairmont in the Rouge Room, where among the things that you will learn of the peel back the curtain and what happens at the OMT division, the most exciting moment is when Joel Gaiman will reveal the annual OMT artifact, which none of us have any clue about except Joel Gaiman, and so we cannot wait for our artifact. You should join us as we go from our business meeting into our social tonight and continue to network and be among one another. So please join us. The last thing you should know is that this talk will be put up online on the OMT website, along with our Pandi Award winner. I don't know if it's in the room, but we'll announce that tonight, who gets to interview David, and that will be up as well. So if you missed anything, keep an eye out for that, and you can share that as well. Thank you all. Have a great day today, and we'll see you tonight.